I'm Simon Ditchburn. I'm the Managing Director of the Tudor Group of companies, and you're watching the construction of the Cube Condominium. So far this series, I've formed enough steelwork and poured enough concrete to build me half the height of the entire concrete. I've spent millions of baht doing it, and I've buried it all under the ground. Right, I've reached the stage now of the basement slab or the car park, whichever way you want to look at it. But this is the point where the concrete has got to be poured directly on top of the land. So for me, it's really important that we use a damp-proof course and stop as much of that groundwater from coming up into the concrete as possible. Now, amazingly enough, this is not part of Thai planning permission. It's shocking, really, but coming from English construction, I absolutely insist on it. I've got to stop those problems that could come in the future. This will form a beam that runs the full outside perimeter of the actual slab, the basement. And the aim of this beam is so that the concrete won't just slurry out all over the place. So it's reinforced to actually lock the concrete in position. But notice that I also run the damp proofing course underneath the beam and up the other side. What I've got to try and do is stop water from seeping in any of the weakest points. This part of the damp proof coursing is a little bit more difficult. Although we can run the membrane length and to the side of the columns, we can't actually get the membrane in between the rebar. So in this area where the damp is not normally expected to rise more than 1 metre or 1.5 metres through either a wall or a column, we'll actually form all of these columns with a chemical inside the concrete, and that will stop that issue from coming up through. I'll show you that when we get to that part later. We've finished off the damp proof course. As you can see behind me, the entire area now, the whole basement, has actually got that damp proof course on it. But I've covered it with what we call a lean concrete, which is basically just 2 or 3 centimetres of concrete, and I'm trying to protect it because anytime we pierce that damp proof course is a possibility for water to come up through. And I've got to consider we've got a lot of people walking up and down here, and I've got a layer of steel to go on the top of that damp proof course, and I don't want any problems. I don't want the water to come through. In a nice air-conditioned office this time. It's actually 35 degrees out there, so it's nice to come into a bit of air condition, cool myself down a little bit. Now, a bit earlier in the series I was trying to explain to you about the engineer, and that each step of the construction that you go through, you have to have everything signed off. Now here's an example for you. First step is you have the design engineer. Now that design engineer has actually designed for us what the footings are going to look like and how the pilings are going to look like afterwards. So he's given us a design of how the steel work will go together and how much weight that will actually support in the building itself. Now you have a second engineer that actually comes along to report to make sure that we have built what the architect engineer has told us. Now we've just received our reports here for the footings to make sure that it's all signed off clearly, and it shows a complete test of every single pile that we've put into the footings there, and the most important item at the very end is that we get a copy of the engineer's ID card. It's all been signed to say we built it correctly according to the architect's design, and these are the papers that go in to get your final sign off from City Hall, what they call in Thailand the O6. If you don't get these signatures as you go through the construction or the various different stages, you're not going to get your sign off and your building will never be accepted. So that's enough, I think, of the boring explanation of everything. Next time we've got to be putting the steel into the footings, into the basement and the car park. So we'll see you next time.